The stars burned like open wounds across the dark sky. As fleets clashed in every corner of the galaxy, ships fell in silence, while screams echoed through shattered calms. The war had raged for decades between the Tyrannus coalition and the Zikari, dominion to mighty empires locked in hatred, neither willing to bow, both carving their names into the bones of countless worlds. Planets burned, civilizations crumbled, hope vanished from the minds of the weak, and even the strong began to question if peace was a myth in the outer systems. Whispers spread like wildfire, rumors of a new force, a shadow watching from afar, a species yet untouched by galactic politics. Some laughed and mocked, others trembled behind reinforced hulls. The word human meant nothing to most, only a few knew the name and fewer took it seriously, until the signal came. A single message echoed across battle frequencies. From the third spiral system, known as Sol, the transmission was short and cold. Earth has entered the war. At first the empires laughed, their strategy meetings continued as planned. No one feared a backwater planet barely out of its own solar neighborhood. How much could they possibly know about war? How much damage could one little species do? Then came the first sighting. A Zikari dreadnought patrolling the Duskmire border detected a small unidentified vessel. The dreadnought locked weapons and fired, expecting scrap to scatter across the void. Instead, the dreadnought's systems went offline, its hull cracked from within. Emergency calls were intercepted and silenced. The vessel vanished without leaving a signature. Only a single lifeboat survived. Inside was a Zikari captain, shivering, pale eyes wide and wild. His voice cracked as he stammered. They had no warning, no fear. Their weapons were primitive but lethal. Their armor moved like it was alive. They spoke nothing, they just moved, killed, and left. They are not soldiers, they are something else. When the Dominion Council heard his words, they scoffed until two more dreadnoughts disappeared near the void line. No bodies, no remains, no answers, only silence and the hum of something coming, something human. The Tyrannus responded with prideful threats. They sent a fleet to show dominance, to crush this new actor before it spread its influence. They expected an easy sweep, but what returned were ashes and fear. Survivors described a swarm of machines, not large, not numerous, but devastating. Every human unit fought like a cornered animal, feral, precise, unstoppable. They used knives where others used plasma. They smiled in battle like they were born for it, and when one fell, another took its place, each stronger, each angrier. Some officers suggested retreat. The word felt like poison, but it lingered in their minds. Something had shifted, the war had changed, as if a new rule had been written and no one had been told. As the weeks passed, more systems reported sightings, human drop pods falling like meteors, humans walking unarmored into ambushes and walking out alone, humans hacking into enemy tech, using it better than its creators, humans taking on entire squads without backup, and winning. Alien generals started studying their behavior. Analysts tried to understand their psychology, but every report ended the same: they are unpredictable, they are dangerous, and they do not stop. The Zikari High Chancellor held an emergency meeting. If humans continued unchecked, both empires would fall. He proposed an alliance, a pause in hostility to handle this mutual threat. But even as he spoke, news arrived that a joint Zikari Tyrannus base had been obliterated by a human stealth unit. One soldier survived, and he told them the most chilling part. They knew we were allies. They didn't care. They said, we all let this war happen, and now we will all pay. The war became chaos. Factions crumbled, commanders fell, morale broke among the proudest armies in the galaxy, because now they weren't just fighting each other, they were surviving something worse, from a world that knew no mercy, that trained in fire, that evolved through struggle and war and blood. The name human was no longer mocked, it was feared, spoken in whispers among soldiers, written in bold red across warning signs: do not engage human forces, evacuate on sight, protect your civilians. From human contact, commanders requested full data profiles on Earth, but most of the information had been classified, sealed off by unknown protocols. Their satellites read the message burned into Earth's orbital defense wall: we are the product of war, and we are tired of watching. Now we act. The Galactic Council called for a ceasefire, but the humans didn't respond. They just kept moving forward, from shadow to shadow, system to system, reclaiming peace, not with diplomacy, but with precision force. They had joined the war, and now every soldier, every general, every species cowered in fear, knowing deep down something ancient and furious had awakened, and it wore a human face. The airlock hissed open with a low growl, and the soldiers inside the alien dropship turned toward the breach, weapons raised, ready for combat. But nothing came through at first. Then they saw it, a figure walking through fire and ash, not running, not ducking, just walking straight through, like the flames were wind, and the bullets were whispers. The figure was human, covered in strange armor that shimmered like metal and shadow, and in its hands was no high Tech weapon, no plasma rifle, just a long jagged blade etched with marks no one could translate. The alien squad opened fire, every weapon unleashed in sync their training. Sharp their instincts, fast, but the human moved faster, not with teleportation, not with tricks, just raw speed and terrifying precision. The first soldier lost his arm. Before he could blink, the second was split from shoulder to hip. The third tried to run, but the human reached him before the door did, and silence returned. The last soldier watched from behind a broken crate, his breathing ragged, eyes wide. He saw the human stop, turn, and stare at him. No emotion, no anger, just a stare. And then the human was gone just like that, and the soldier dropped his weapon and whispered a prayer to any god listening, because he knew he had seen the beginning of the end. Across the galaxy, fleets scrambled to change tactics. Planetary leaders demanded new strategies. But none of it mattered. Humans weren't predictable. They didn't follow rules or codes known to the galactic empires. They used chaos like a weapon. They understood fear like it was currency, and they spent it well. Stories started spreading. Soldiers began deserting, not because of orders but because of nightmares. They had never faced an enemy that hunted them in their own strongholds, that waited in silence inside their bunkers, that turned their own turrets against them. Without leaving a trace, the Zikari tried psychological warfare, broadcasting threats and propaganda to weaken human resolve, but humans responded by broadcasting silence. And then one by one they hacked those same networks and played screams of past Tyrannus war crimes on loop, for everyone to hear, reminding them who the monsters really were. A Tyrannus general named Volkor tried to turn the tide. He assembled a special strike team trained in guerrilla warfare, equipped with alien tech harvested from every corner of known space. He swore they would capture a human alive, to study, to dissect, to understand. But what they found was not a human. It was a trap, every corridor rigged with primitive explosives, every wall wired with makeshift shrapnel devices. When the smoke cleared, only one of Volkor's soldiers limped out, holding a bloodied fragment of a human dog tag and repeating one phrase over and over. They knew we were coming. They let us in. They played with us like it was a game. Then came the retaliation. Humans launched what they called the Thunderfall operation. They dropped from orbit without ships, using only suits made from Earth-grown nanoweave fabric that absorbed kinetic energy and impact force. They landed across 3 separate worlds, all within the same solar rotation, and dismantled entire military facilities within 6 hours. They took no prisoners. They left messages carved into metal and bone, messages that read, "This war ends with us or it never ends." At all galactic councils tried peace talks, but humans never answered. They moved with a purpose, and the galaxy began to understand that purpose was not power, not conquest, not revenge, but closure. Humans didn't fight to win. They fought to finish. The Tyrannus Council, in desperation, turned to old enemies, proposing alliances with forgotten factions, but it was too late. Even those factions feared what humans had become, because by now humanity was more than a name. It was a myth, a warning, a force you whispered about, but never provoked. On the outer rim, a small child stared at the night sky. Her father, a Zikari refugee, told her tales of a blue planet with oceans like liquid glass and storms that could level mountains. He told her those people came from there, those people who once fought each other more than they fought anyone else. And yet when the stars cried for help, they rose not as conquerors, but as a storm to break the endless war. Somewhere deep in a human command vessel, a woman stood in front of a map, her eyes scanning systems, her hand hovering over coordinates. Behind her stood soldiers, not smiling, not boasting, just silent and ready. One of them asked her where to strike next. She answered not where, when, because they already knew where the real battle was, the one in the minds of every enemy who saw a shadow and flinched, who heard a breath and ran, who once ruled planets and now feared footfalls in the dark. The war had changed, not because humanity joined, but because when they did, they brought with them the weight of 1,000 wars, the memory of 1,000,000 graves, and the fury of a world that had been silent for too long. The question was no longer who would win, but how long the galaxy could survive. With humanity awakened and walking through its battlefield, the trench stank of metal, blood, and smoke as the alien soldier crawled through the mud, his 3 arms shaking from exhaustion. He had once been proud, once loyal to the Zikari dominion, but that pride had crumbled when the humans arrived. He had seen them tear through his battalion, without breaking stride, no pause, no fear, only motion like weapons wearing flesh. He pressed himself against the trench wall, clutching a broken blade, and hoped the shadows would hide him, but he felt it before. He saw it, the pressure in the air, the stillness, like the world itself held its breath. And then boots, not armored, not heavy, just boots, moving step by step toward him. A human stepped into view, not towering, not monstrous, just a figure wearing worn armor, scarred from 100 battles. The alien tried to scream, tried to strike, But the human simply raised a hand and pointed behind him, and when the alien turned, he saw his own comrades already fallen, every last one, and the human had never even drawn a weapon. Later he would live only to tell the tale, a tale that would spread and grow and wrap itself around the minds of soldiers like a vine of dread. Because that was what humans did, they planted fear and let it grow. The Tyrannus forces assembled new defense lines across Sector 11, installing auto turrets, atmospheric mines, and motion detectors. They even brought in telepathic seers to anticipate human assaults. But nothing stopped them. The humans didn't come from the front or from the skies, they came from within, disguised, crawling through vent shafts, swimming through toxic canals, pretending to be dead bodies, and then rising at the worst possible moment. They broke minds before they broke bones. A Zikari tactician who once led 3 planetary invasions was found curled in his command chair, whispering the same line over and over. They fight like they want to die, but they do not die. The way we do, they rise and they return, and they remember command structures. Fractured rumors twisted into prophecies. Fleets turned their weapons on each other in panic, because the humans made them see threats everywhere. One fleet fired on a shadow, thinking it was a human stealth ship, only to discover it was a sensor glitch. By then 5 cruisers had already turned to fireballs. The Zikari and Tyrannus began tracking Earth's movements, trying to understand their pattern. But no pattern existed. The humans struck randomly, or so it seemed, until they realized the humans were not chasing victory, they were chasing pain, targeting worlds where the worst massacres had occurred years ago, as if they had read the galaxy's crimes and marked them for reckoning. On the 4th moon of Nalithar, a Tyrannus commander was captured by humans. They didn't torture him, didn't interrogate him. They simply made him walk through the ruins his own soldiers had created years before, ruins now silent, filled with bones and broken dreams. They made him listen to the recordings of children screaming, of elders begging for mercy, of voices asking why, and then they left him alive to carry the sound back with him. And when he returned, he was no longer a commander. He was a prophet, warning others that the humans had not come to claim thrones or trophies. They had come to rewrite the truth in blood across the stars in a distant system. A Zikari scout watched a human unit fight off 6 armored tanks with nothing but scrap metal and hand signals. They coordinated without speaking, their instincts sharper than any AI, their rage deeper than any algorithm. When the battle ended, the humans didn't celebrate. They simply walked to their fallen comrades, picked up their tags, and whispered names into the dirt. The scout wept not from fear, but from something else, something older. He had never seen an enemy mourn the way humans did, and in that moment he understood they were not killing because they wanted to, they were killing because someone had to, and they had been chosen by suffering itself. Throughout the galactic channels, voices began to change. Soldiers, once eager to face humans, now refused orders to engage colonies. Once proud of their empires, began hiding their banners, painting their walls with symbols of surrender, hoping the humans would spare them, and in many cases they did. Humans didn't attack the weak or the helpless, they struck only those who had once struck others. They hunted predators, not prey, and slowly that truth spread, turning horror into awe and fear into a strange kind of respect. An old Tyrannus senator, once a warmonger, now walked with a cane and told stories to children about the day the humans arrived and brought silence where there had been screams, justice where there had been cruelty, vengeance wrapped in flesh and bone, and honor in blood-stained hands. And as he finished, he always ended the same way: we feared them when they came, and we should have. But now I see they were not here to destroy us, they were here to remind us what war really costs, and what peace should never forget. Cave walls dripped with old blood and broken memories, as the human soldier sat alone, sharpening his blade in silence. The blade was not of alien design, it was forged on earth, folded metal, touched by fire and sweat, not polished, not elegant, but it had history. And every enemy it cut remembered that history as pain. Across from him, a Zikari prisoner watched with eyes wide and breath trembling. He had fought humans before, or at least tried to. He had seen his unit torn apart in seconds. He had heard the roar of human engines and the strange silence of their footsteps, and he had expected this moment to be his end. But the human did not strike. Instead, he reached into a pouch and pulled out something strange. A small photo, faded edges, a child smiling next to a dog on green grass. The Zikari could not understand the meaning, but he knew it mattered, and that disturbed him more than anything else, because he had believed the humans were rage and fire, only warriors and weapons. But this was different. This was memory, this was humanity, and it scared him more than blades ever could. In orbit above the caves, a Tyrannus flagship picked up movement, hundreds of signatures swarming toward the atmosphere. The officers shouted orders, weapons powered up. But it was too late. The humans had already breached their perimeter using nothing but drop suits. and debris camouflage. They fell from the sky like vengeful stars, every impact a crater, every step a tremor. They didn't need numbers, they needed will. And their will was forged from pain. In the command room a general screamed for logic. How can they keep fighting? How can they move with wounds like that? Why don't they fall? And the answer came from his own advisor: because they have something we do. Not they have a reason to keep getting up. Human squads pushed through trenches, using smoke and mirrors, misdirection and madness. One carried a flag, not to claim land, but to remember fallen comrades. Another used music from old Earth symphonies, played on loop through enemy calms, turning confusion into art and chaos into terror. In one battlefield, a single human held a line against 30 Zikari warriors. They rushed him, thinking him broken and alone, but as they reached him they fell to traps he had set with nothing but wire and instinct. When it was over he walked toward their commander, not to kill him but to hand him a datapad filled with images of the civilians his men had killed a year before. The message was clear: you remember now. So do we. Elsewhere in the galaxy, factions who had hidden during the war emerged, watching humans reshape the battlefield, not with strength alone, but with principles. They never struck retreating enemies, they never bombed hospitals. They protected children, even alien ones, carrying them from firestorms and shielding them with their own bodies, because to humans war was not about dominance. It was about debt, paying a price so that others never would. On a ruined moon deep in the shadow zone, a human medic ran through flames, dragging a Zikari child from a collapsed bunker. Behind her, two Tirana snipers watched, confused, unsure whether to shoot her or salute her, and in that hesitation they found a thought they had never held before. Maybe the humans weren't monsters, maybe they were what monsters feared. Stories began to shift, whispered tales in canteens and barracks, stories of humans who cried after battle, who planted seeds in scorched fields, who wrote names of the dead into stone walls so they were never forgotten. And the enemy began to listen, began to wonder, began to question their orders. The Zikari high priest held a gathering on the temple planet, calling for divine insight about the humans. But the answer came not from gods, but from a wounded soldier who rose with broken bones and whispered, they are not demons, they are reminders, reminders of what we became and what we should have never allowed to exist. And so the humans kept moving system to system, not seeking thrones, but closing old wounds, removing warlords, destroying labs that created weapons of extinction, disarming minds laid decades ago, and leaving behind not conquest, but quiet in the sector known as the fracture line. To fleets once enemies now floated side by side, unmoving as human ships passed between them. The commanders gave no order to attack, they simply watched, knowing that fire would bring fire, and silence was the only path forward aboard a human flagship. A captain read a list of names, not strategies, not coordinates, just names of those who never came back, each name spoken aloud, followed by a moment of breathless stillness. And around her soldiers bowed their heads, not in grief, but in promise, the promise that they would not stop until no child feared the sky, until no home burned in silence, until the war ended truly and forever, not with surrender, but with understanding. The fortress of Zither Prime stood tall and proud, its towers reaching into the clouds, its walls laced with plasma barriers and railgun nests. It had never fallen, not once in 1,000 years, but now the alarm screamed not from internal systems, but from the panic in the soldiers' voices. Because the humans had arrived, not with fleets, not with announcements. They simply appeared inside the walls, silent as the wind, deadly as memory. One by one, the defense turrets shut down, overridden by hands that typed faster than machines. One by one, the power grids flickered and died, and shadows danced through the corridors with no warning and no mercy. The general of Zither Prime stared at the monitors and whispered how, and the answer came not from his staff, but from the floor beneath him, exploding upward as a human soldier rose from the dust. His armor cracked, his face covered in ash, but his eyes alive, alive with fire and grief, and something deeper, something ancient. And as the guards rushed to protect the general, they all fell, not because they were weak, but because the human was stronger than their fear and faster than their resolve. And when the general opened his mouth to beg, the human simply raised a finger to silence him and dropped a datapad at his feet filled with records, blueprints, and names, all proving what Zither Prime had done years ago. The weapons they built, the villages they erased, the children they tested on. And then the human turned and walked away, not because he had no rage, but because his mission was not vengeance, it was justice across the stars. Others witnessed the same shift, humans breaking into command centers and exposing secrets. Instead of stealing treasures, humans disabling doomsday devices and helping slaves escape. Instead of claiming power, humans choosing to rebuild what they had destroyed brick by brick. And every enemy that saw them began to understand humanity was not there to conquer, they were there to cleanse, to remove The rot that war had allowed to fester, and in their eyes everyone who stood silent was part of that rot in the inner council chambers of the tyrannous empire. High Command stood in silence watching a transmission play on loop, a message sent by Human Fleet Command. We do not seek to rule, we do not seek revenge, we seek an end to this war. And if you will not surrender your cruelty, we will end it with our own hands. Choose. And for the first time in their history, the Tyrannus hesitated. For the first time they looked at their maps not as territories, but as graves unmarked and unjustified. And many chose to walk away, to drop their weapons, to turn their ships toward home. But not all. Some chose to fight, and those who did met the storm. The humans no longer moved in small units, they moved as one, the Iron Wave. They called it fleets of silent ships, soldiers who marched without music, without boasting, with only purpose in their hearts and names on their armor, the names of those lost along the way. In orbit above the shattered world of Viren, a massive battle raged. Humans against the last holdouts of the Zikari warlords, and as ships clashed and skies burned, the ground below saw a different war. Human engineers planting trees in dead soil, human doctors tending to alien children shaking with fear and hunger, human artists painting murals on broken walls, scenes of peace, of unity, of stars without blood. And slowly even the enemies below began to question who they truly were. Fighting in the ruins of a temple, a Zikari warrior cornered a human medic, blade raised, heart pounding, but then he saw her hands covered not in blood, but in bandages. She had just saved his sister a moment ago, and now waited for him to strike, but he dropped the blade and knelt not in surrender but in shame. And she simply helped him stand, because that was what they did, not because it was easy, but because it was right. In the last hours of the war, a broadcast reached every planet in the known galaxy, a human voice, old, tired, but steady. This war was born from silence, born from greed, born from forgetting what life means. We came not to conquer, but to remind you and ourselves that war is not the answer, it is the last scream of a world that refused to listen. Listen now while you still can. In the aftermath, silence ruled, not out of fear, but of reflection. Cities once filled with sirens now heard music again. Children once hidden now played under open skies. And in the center of every square on every world stood a single statue, not of a king, not of a hero, just a soldier kneeling, head bowed, holding a list of names. And above him, written in a dozen languages, were the words, they did not come to destroy, they came to finish what we could not, and in doing so, they gave us back the stars. To wind blew across the burned plains of Tilmaris, carrying the scent of ash and rebirth. Where once stood monuments of war, now only ruins remained, and among those ruins walked a small human boy no older than 10. His hands held a flower grown from cracked soil, and his eyes reflected both innocence and shadows. He did not speak, he simply placed the flower beside a stone where names had been carved in dozens of languages, names of the fallen, names of those who had fought not for glory, but for an end to the cycle of death. Above him ships floated in silence, massive human carriers, drifting like giants, watching over the stars below, not with weapons raised, but with shields extended, and medics aboard ready to offer aid instead of orders. Humanity had changed the battlefield, not with brutality, but with memory. And in every system where humans had once brought war, now they brought tools and teachers, building hospitals from the ruins of command centers, transforming training camps into libraries and parks. No one had asked them to do it, but they did it because they understood that if you leave a wound open, it bleeds again. The Tyrannus High Council, now reduced to a handful of former leaders, sent envoys to Earth, not to demand, not to negotiate, but to learn. And they were received not by generals, but by farmers, by builders, by poets who had once held rifles and now held pens. One envoy asked a human elder, how did you become this strong? How did you survive so many wars and still choose peace? And the elder smiled, not with pride but with weight, and said, because we remembered what it cost, because we were once like you until the fire got too close and we lost too much to ever let it burn again. In the skies above Akvatar, the last remnants of Zikari resistance finally surrendered, their ships disabled, their flags lowered, and a message sent to all human frequencies: we do not understand you, but we will follow. And for the first time the human response was simple and kind. We do not ask you to understand us, only to walk with us, and remember why we walk at all. Across dozens of systems, ceremonies were held not for victory but for healing. Every species brought their own rituals, their own prayers, and the humans did not mock them, did not interfere. They simply stood beside them, heads bowed, hearts quiet, offering the one gift they had carried since Earth: fire and forgiveness. In the colony of Vosk, 3 children played together. One human, one Tyrannus, one Zikari, unaware of the blood that had once stained their worlds. Their laughter rising through the air like a song of things forgotten. And above them, Watching quietly sat a human soldier, his armor scratched, his face worn, his rifle locked away, and his gaze soft because this was what he had fought for, not banners, not medals, but laughter unbroken by war in an old archive hidden deep beneath the ruins of a battle station. A human historian uncovered records of forgotten atrocities, and instead of deleting them he uploaded them to the galactic net so all could see, not to shame, but to teach, because memory was the shield against repetition. And he knew that hiding the truth was the first step toward another war, so he wrote every name, every action, every silence that allowed evil to grow, and he signed the record not as a hero, but as a witness, and his final words were simple: never again, not by our hands, not by yours, not by silence. In a quiet temple on a world that had once been bombed into dust, a Zikari priest lit a candle in honor of the humans who had defended his village during the final days, and beside him knelt a human girl orphaned by war, now adopted by a culture that once saw her as enemy. And together they prayed in both languages, forming a new one built from pain and choice and light. Above Earth in orbit, a new station was completed, not a weapon, not a fortress, but a place called Haven, a sanctuary where all species could come, not as diplomats or warriors, but as people seeking rest and wisdom. And humans stood at the gate, not as guards, but as hosts ready to offer what their ancestors once lacked: understanding. And in the final report sent to all galaxies, the United Council wrote, we feared them, we fought them, and in doing so we saw what we had become, but through their fire we found our mirror, and in it we found the strength to change. Let the stars remember not the war, not the blood, but the peace that came. When humans taught us to be more than survivors, they taught us to be whole again. And from the edges of space new ships began to rise, ships not marked by empire, but by unity, bearing flags not of power but of memory, and on each one, written in quiet glowing letters, was a single phrase borrowed from Earth: lest we forget. The sun rose slowly over the emerald fields of Theros, once a battlefield, now transformed into a living symbol of rebirth. And among the tall grass and flowering vines, children from many worlds ran, laughing, chasing one another, their games innocent, their joy untouched by the horrors their parents had endured. In the distance stood a statue taller than any tree, a human soldier cast in bronze, one hand holding a broken weapon, the other reaching down not to strike, but to lift up. Beside it sat a plaque engraved in every major galactic language: they fought so we could learn to live again. Nearby, in a large open pavilion, leaders from across the galaxy gathered, not in polished uniforms, but in simple robes. Some bore scars, some walked with mechanical limbs, all bore the weight of the past and hope for what was coming. The central speaker, a human named Commander Rhea, stepped forward, her voice calm, her stance unshaken. Once we came to end a war, but what we did was remind the stars what it meant to feel, to hope, to protect. She looked around, not with pride but with purpose. Today we honor not just humans, but every species that chose to stand again after falling, that chose memory over fear, that chose unity over vengeance. And in the silence that followed, many wiped tears from eyes they once believed incapable of such things, because the truth had settled across the stars like starlight, gentle, persistent, and impossible to ignore. Humans had brought change, not because they were perfect, but because they were real. They did not pretend to be saviors, they admitted their failures and showed the courage to rise above them again. And again, on the distant moon of Kale, a group of alien poets gathered for a storytelling ritual. The first voice spoke of the days before the humans came, of endless fighting and loss. The second told of first contact, of fear cloaked in metal and fire. The third voice, however, spoke not of battles, but of a human soldier who carried a Zikari child across a burning bridge, who took a bullet meant for a Tyrannus engineer, who built a garden from ruins so that no one would ever forget. And as the voices rose and mingled, so did a shared truth: humans were not just warriors, they were bridges across pain, across species, across time. In the heart of an abandoned fleet ship now turned into a sanctuary museum, visitors walked through the preserved battle rooms, saw helmets cracked and walls scarred by desperate defense, and at the end of the hall stood a wall of light displaying names, millions of them, not sorted by race or faction or rank, just names of those who gave their lives to protect another. And beneath it a message glowed gently: sacrifice is not measured in blood, but in love. And across from that wall sat an old human woman who had once served on that very ship, and every day she greeted visitors, told stories, and when asked how she survived, she would smile and say, because someone chose to fight for me before I could fight for myself. Far beyond the core worlds, new colonies rose, built jointly by species who once saw each other as monsters, now working side by side. Their architects human, their engineers Tyrannus, their medical teams Zikari, their dreams shared. One boy asked his teacher, why do we still train to fight if the war is over, and the teacher, a human veteran, answered softly, because peace is a garden. And gardens need guardians, not warriors with hate, but protectors with memory and heart. In the deepest sector of space, a probe floated carrying a message written by children from over 50 species, addressed to any life that may someday find it. It read, "We are many, we are different, we are strong, and we are together because once humanity came and reminded us that even the darkest night ends when one soul carries a spark of hope, and finally on Earth itself, where the journey began, a festival was held, not of celebration, but of remembrance. Candles lined every street, each flame marking a lesson learned, a life lost, a promise made, and from the mountains to the oceans the world stood quiet as the people looked to the stars, not with fear, but with a question, what now? And the answer came not from above, but from within. Now we build, now we teach, now we love. And somewhere among the crowd a little girl looked up at her grandfather, a human who had once held a rifle, and she asked, "Were you afraid?" And he nodded, then smiled and said, "Yes, but I walked forward anyway, because the ones before me did the same, and now you will too." And she held his hand tight, her eyes wide with wonder, not at war, but at the legacy of peace built on courage and tears and truth. And across the galaxy the stars watched as for the first time in ages the wounds of war were healing, and the name human was no longer a warning or a weapon, but a reminder of what was possible when fear is faced, when hope is protected, and when love is chosen again and again and again. In the quiet of the deep stars, where no wars echoed and no fleets moved, a lone vessel drifted across the black, a garden ship not made for battle but for beauty inside it. A young human girl walked barefoot across soft moss, her fingers brushing petals grown from every known world and some unknown. Her name was Nova, born after the war, raised in peace, taught not how to destroy but how to heal. Beside her walked a Zikari child and a Tyrannus boy, laughing together, arguing about which flower smelled the sweetest. And Nova simply smiled because she knew they were the reason her people had fought, the reason so many had bled, not for conquest, not for pride, but for this moment, when laughter was louder than fear. Far away on a station orbiting a planet once shattered by war, an old man stood watching the sky, his uniform faded, his eyes filled with memories. He had seen entire worlds fall, watched friends become legends, carried burdens that never left. But now as he looked at the stars, he did not see threats or enemies. He saw possibility. He whispered a name lost in the records, but held in his heart, a name of the first soldier who refused to shoot, who chose mercy instead, and changed everything. And as he turned, a hologram shimmered beside him, showing a new fleet, not armed for battle, but equipped with seeds and songs, ready to carry peace. Where silence still lingered below on the planet, children painted murals of strange creatures and ships, and in one corner a drawing of a human hand holding three smaller hands, one green, one silver, one blue, and under it written, in childish scrawl, was the message, "Together we grow again." In the halls of learning, new history was written, stories not of domination, but of unity, textbooks told of mistakes, of horrors, of redemption. They spoke of humans not as saviors, but as reminders of what courage looks like when it walks alone, of what love becomes when tested by fire on a distant moon. Two lovers stood beneath an alien tree, its leaves singing with the breeze. One was human, the other Zikari, and as they placed their hands on a shared ring crafted from metal found in the ruins of an old battlefield, they made a promise to each other and to the future that war would never return, not because they forgot, but because they always remembered. In a forgotten archive buried beneath layers of stone and dust, a machine flickered to life. It was ancient, left by the humans before they departed to unknown reaches of space. Its message was simple and final: if you find this, know that we came not to conquer, not to punish, not to rule. We came to remind you that peace is possible if you dare to protect it. If you carry the memory forward, then we have not truly left. And across the stars a quiet wind moved through systems once ravaged, now reborn, carrying a name not feared, not worshipped, but honored, the name of a species that came from a little blue world, scarred by its own history, yet brave enough to carry the galaxy toward a new one. And as that wind passed over cities and forests, oceans and ruins, it whispered the truth that would never be forgotten: the end